Okay, welcome back. We are now a one-track conference for the final two main tracks, and I'm very excited about both of these presentation programs. One of the most important things to me personally is the idea of outreach and how we as scientists can have impact on the community at large. This is a panel that's all about that. The title of the panel is Public Engagement with Science, Designing Science Communication and Learning Experiences with Networked Image-Rich Media. This is also the largest panel we have in this conference. And for this panel, the moderator will be Marti Louw. So I'll introduce Marti, and she'll introduce all the panelists. Marti Louw received her master's in interaction design at Carnegie Mellon University. She's research faculty in the University of Pittsburgh Center in Learning in Out-of-School Environments, which is part of the University of Pittsburgh department called Learning, Research, and Development Center. And so she's just across the road from Carnegie Mellon University. She was, prior to getting her master's in interaction design, a producer at Nova WGBH and an associate producer at Ched Angier Productions. Thank you, Marti.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? I'm on at least one of these mics. So a lot of this conference, I've been listening to a lot of the talks, and it's been focused mainly on scientists coming and thinking about using GigaPan as a tool for research and documentation. But over and over again, we keep hearing people talk about it as a tool for outreach and education. And so this panel is really an attempt to focus on what does it mean to think about using GigaPan as a tool for science engagement and learning. And so we've assembled a group of panelists to help us give some different perspectives on this. I just want to do a quick poll of the audience because I've met many of the fine fellows, but I haven't met many of you in the audience. And I was curious how many people here define themselves as scientists. And I had a conversation at dinner last night and realized that archaeologists and paleontologists may not consider themselves scientists because they destroyed the evidence and the experiments weren't repeatable. But putting those kind of arguments aside, I'd like those who think they're kind of engaged primarily in scientific research as an activity to raise their hand. And if they'd keep it up, because I'm going to ask a follow-on question. Of this group of people here, how many of you see education and outreach as a small part of your work? And then how many of you see it as a really important piece of your work? All right, so and I just also wanted to find out how many people in the audience were engaged in science communication, science education, the design of informal learning experiences. How many of those kind of folks did we have in the audience? Interesting. So that was a larger, in past conferences, it's been more skewed towards scientists. We're seeing more of the sort of people who mediate between science and the public coming in. So anyway, let me start now by introducing our... Oh, can you hear me? Thanks. I'm very excited to introduce our panel. The first two people, I would say, work in that role of mediating science content for the public. Our first speaker is going to be Jim Richardson. He's a veteran National Geographic photographer. He has done over 25 different commissions for the magazine and has been a contributing editor to their travel magazine. He's also a 2009 Fine Fellow, so he's been experimenting with this technology, and we're really interested to hear from him what he has seen as the limits and the affordances of this technology for storytelling and communicating science. Our second panelist is Stacy Gohman. She's from the Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose. She's an exhibit developer. And just a note about the Children's Discovery Museum, they are probably one of the leading institutions in the country looking at how you create early childhood learning experiences around science. And so her institution has done a tremendous amount of innovative work in this area. She's a Fine Fellow of this year, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how they've been using and how they might want to use this technology at their institution. Molly is a doctoral student in ecology at Miami State University, and she was a 2009 Fine Fellow, I think, as well. But I think what's interesting with her is she seems to me as one of these new breeds or emerging breeds of young scientists who really see public engagement, community engagement as a core professional activity. And so she's going to tell us a little bit about how she thinks about that work. Kevin Crowley, I always have a little trouble describing him because he leads my group at the University of Pittsburgh, Center for Learning Out-of-School Environments. He's an associate professor in the Learning Research Development Center, and he is a leading person thinking about informal learning environments, how people learn in informal learning environments. So he's going to give us that academic sort of meta view of that. Our last panelist is Dennis vanEngelsdorp. He is a bee researcher and a former Penn State apiarist. And what I found really interesting about Dennis's work is that he has used a range of media formats, from public television, morning shows, TED Talks, to extension kinds of activities in communicating and really getting the issue of colony collapse disorder out to the public. And so I'm hoping he's going to tell us a little bit about what it's like to use these different media. So with that, I'm just going to give a couple slides to set up the talk, and then we're going to hear from each of the panelists and hopefully leave time between presentations for comments. So this is a slide that's frequently brought out at conferences I attend in the sort of academic world. And while it looks kind of, I think the point it's trying to make is to say that informal science education is actually a really important area of concern. If you look at this, I think the point it's trying to make is by the time we finish high school, if you think back on your school years, school seems like a really dominant experience, but if you look at the amount of time that we're actually engaged in formal learning activities, it tends to be, or it's around 18.5%, which is actually not that much of our time, which leaves this big blue sea of opportunity where people are learning in all sorts of ways that isn't formal. They learn at home, through activities with their friends and parents, through hobbies, through media, and increasingly on the internet. And so I think it's just kind of instructive to think as parents, as community organizers, as educators, and as people doing funding, that there's an opportunity to bring science learning into this informal space. Another thing, just again to sort of set the background, the Pew Research Center has done a number of studies looking at how the internet is affecting and shaping our news and media landscape. And this study done in 2006 was specifically looking at how people got science information. And in 2006, 20% of Americans' primary source of science news and information was the internet. If you look at those numbers, they're only increasing. And I think that's just to say we need to think about how we work with this new medium. And yeah, let me move on. Just scanning, the literature and thinking about new and old media, and thinking about what are the affordances of networked technologies and network information communication technologies that allow us to kind of think about audience in new ways. No longer are people just watching, viewing, listening, reading, but they have abilities to contribute, network, share, communicate, collaborate, all those kinds of things. And these are, as you read through the science communication literature, these are the kind of shifts or the dimensions along which these new technologies are taking us. And sort of the question I wanted to put out to the panel and to you as an audience is, these affordances and this kind of shifts in new technology, how are we going to use those to support science engagement and science learning? And so I'm going to stop talking now and let our panelists try and address this question. Yes?
Am I on?
You would be on.
Okay, well, I think if you could put that last slide back up, that would say everything I have to say, and I'll just turn it over now to Stacy. I'm kidding you about putting it on. That was perhaps the core, though, of what I was just going to get to about that. At National Geographic, we are in the throes of just that business of turning over control. We were in the business for a very long time of we speak and you listen, and the lecture model of education, and it's top down, and it's very difficult for people to get out of those models of that we are speaking here, and you're going to be quiet and hear what we have to say. That's our business, is to produce these kind of things. In the meantime, and I must say that for people within those institutions, and it's not just us, you can see it all up and down the media world of people who deal with all kinds of things besides science. It's very difficult to make that jump. And invariably we see the things where somebody comes in and does a 2-hour lecture in the morning about social media, and over lunch everybody gets religion, and they're going to go out and do it that afternoon. Except these are not folks who know how to actually do it and to actually get out of their skins and get into the whole business of being collaborative. What were all those words up there? Yes, collaborative, media rich, all those things, is very difficult for them to do. Meanwhile, 2 mornings ago, I was sitting at coffee in Lindsborg, Kansas with my little circle of friends, and these are all folks over 50. They all have about as much hair as I have, so you know their relative ages. And I had seen on the some internet site the fact that Kansas, my home state, led the nation in percentage of people on Facebook. Now, 40% of the people in Kansas on Facebook. That's a lot of people. And I said, that can't be true, can it? And so I asked, so there's 12 people sitting around the table. They're all over 50 years old. And I said, how many of you are on Facebook? 9 of the 12 raised their hands. Of older folks. And they're doing this collaborative, join in, publish themselves, write their own little blog, doing all these kinds, just the kind of things that you're talking about. We find in the last year, I've spent a fair amount of my time exploring, besides the GigaPan kind of collaborative things, all kinds of things, including, as I said earlier, Flickr and blogging and all those kind of things, because I wanted to figure out how that system works. And Flickr is a great example because you find all these niche communities forming under there, interest groups, all of these sort of mechanisms that you just were talking about on that page. And it's whether it's the GigaPan model or those kind of models or the Facebook models, they're extraordinarily powerful, and I'm just blown away by the system. And that's why everybody would talk to me about students yesterday that I talked about wanting to be a National Geographic photographer, and I was honored by that. But I also had to say to them, in the current environment, in the way that information is being spread and used, I don't know if there's going to be a National Geographic magazine in 10 years. Now, Mark Bauman, you didn't hear me say that. Okay. I know that the information will be used, but I don't know that it's going to be printed on paper and sent to your mailbox, and that you're going to keep having to buy new bookshelves every 2 years to hold all the National Geographics that are out there. But and I don't look on this as with doom and gloom. This is wonderful. The business of being able to take that GigaPan picture, put it up there, have everybody come in and comment on it, become part of the collaborative process is just revolutionary. And so I have no fears about the future of media. I have simply fears that people like me will not be able to keep up with the transformation and the changes, because I have inherent belief that those people who make those transitions are going to be the ones who will be playing in the game in 5 and 10 years. Yeah.
Thank you. We have Stacy's going to be our next presenter. While she comes up, if there's any questions that
I have one.
Yes.
The thing about participatory media is that, and this was one of Marti's points, there's an issue about quality, an issue about production, an issue about how reflective or close to the science is it. And as something like National Geographic thinks about moving into this new participatory space, I'm just curious what the internal conversations are about the high quality kind of commitment to the science that the magazine has had, how that's going to play out in social media and participatory media.
One of the things I think to remember is that the initial impetus for National Geographic Society back then with Alexander Graham Bell was that he wanted people to be able to participate in the exploration. This was 1888. So that bit of it isn't new. The second thing is to remember that while we include on our website all these things like My Shot and all those kind of things. We also still have some of the most rigorous fact checkers in the world out there, because I run onto them every time I do a story, and I have to verify that if I said in a caption that the sun rises in the east in Tajikistan, they have to find another source to say that's in fact the case. So as far as our particular publication, I think that's I'm confident that adding people is a plus. I don't see content management. Now, one reservation there. There was a photographer, I won't name the name, a famous wildlife photographer, who, in creating an image of a polar bear, desired a different background. And what he did was he took a picture of a polar bear, sort of sitting like this, nice image of a polar bear, and he changes the background and adds a mountain in the background in Photoshop. He labels it for stock usage only, in other words, not editorial usage. Then it goes into the Getty image, or another image collection. I don't think it was Getty. One of our researchers needs a polar bear picture, finds that image, and we run it in National Geographic. Now, the problem comes in because the mountain that he put in the background was a recognizable mountain from Antarctica. You may realize, being scientists, that there aren't many polar bears in Antarctica, and so we managed to publish a picture. Now, that didn't take collaboration. That just took the modern system of how images get used, spread about, bought, sold, and all those kind of things. Meanwhile, I'm a fan of Wikipedia, if that was where the question was going as well, for the great breadth of information that I get out of it, as long as I understand that it's not a scholarly source.
All right, I think we should move to Stacy, who's going to tell us a little bit about their project.
All right. So I'm from the Discovery Museum of San Jose in San Jose, California. And if you wanted to see any of our GigaPans, we've tagged them with BioSite, which is BIOSITE, and it stands for Biology Students Investigating Their Environment, which is an informal education program. We have several programs, 3 in local high schools where we train high school mentors to teach 4th graders about water quality monitoring and testing. And we take the 4th graders out into the field, and they get to get their hands dirty and wet in the creek and test for things and learn about owls and learn about salmon and things. It's really a great program. We've just recently in the spring started to use GigaPans in our ACE program, which is started as an after-school program, after-class experience, and now we outreach to several dozen classrooms in San Jose, ranging from 2nd through 5th grade, and it's a 3-day experience. On the first day, a BioSite staff person goes into the classroom and engages the students in discussion about our watershed. What does that mean? What is a watershed? And how does that impact your life? They do some activities and things like that. The 2nd and 3rd days are out in the field. One day is at the river next to our museum in downtown San Jose, and the other is at a site with activities of the teacher's choosing. We give them some options, and they get to go. So the students get to see the river in a couple of different places. We're talking about the Guadalupe River. But what they don't often get to see are pictures like this, which is up the mountain. We can't get to the headwaters of the Guadalupe River because to get there require you to trespass on private land. So we don't encourage that. But this is from up in the mountain where urban students can't always get to. If you have a poor family, or they don't have a car, or just 2 working parents who don't have the time, you can't get up to the creek to see this kind of imagery. And so we've taken it into the classroom and used it kind of like a scavenger hunt, where the kids can go in and look for spider webs, look for little critter habitats, look for plants sneaking out of the rocks somewhere, and things like that, which gives the kids a chance to explore an area where they don't often get to see in real life. We also have some GigaPans. This is of the same river as it flows past our museum in downtown San Jose. And again, we have different places for kids to just explore. They always seem to find litter, which I suppose is good that they're recognizing that it's litter and it doesn't belong there. But for some kids, it's a matter of, well, can you find what's natural in this photograph and what isn't natural in this photograph? What's man-made and what is natural? That's a distinction that some of the kids have. They don't understand the question at first. Like, well, what do you mean by what's man-made? Well, who made those houses back there? Oh, now I get it. And how's that different from this creek environment next to me? So it's really interesting and engaging, and the kids really love it. We in the classroom use GigaPan offline so that they can't go exploring other things. They try, even though they can't get there, but they do try. And we can help them to explore I got the wrong thing. That's okay. Explore the creek in different places. So we can use the GigaPan from up in the mountains and compare the water quality in this image, which is in downtown San Jose near the Adobe headquarters, to the water quality up in the mountains. And you can see differences in turbidity. You can see, those qualitative things that you can just notice and get kids to see those differences and speculate on what they can do to encourage people to take better care of their watershed. We also have a native plant nursery at one of our high schools where the students grow native plants and then we give them away to local schools and encourage. The only requirement is you have to promise to plant it in your yard. So we give away dozens, well, I think last year 100 flats of native plants to families in San Jose. So to encourage people to get out there, plant native plants, get rid of some of your lawn. You don't need that. And let's go native. We do live in Northern California. This is our garden, and kind of where I see this going. This is our garden at our museum. We have an edible garden in the back where kids can help us planting and help mulching, and they do composting and turn the compost and stuff. But we also have, next to our museum, this huge lawn. This is our museum, this little purple triangle-y building in the back. And I'm going to zoom way in here. There's our duck. Kids love the duck. The duck went away and Bob the builder came in for a while, and kids would cry outside the building because the duck wasn't there. But it's Bob! But the duck, Mommy! It was really odd, to me anyway. This is our building, and right next to it we have this huge lawn space. The Guadalupe River flows through this treed area on the side, and an upcoming project that we have, we've nicknamed the Way Back Lot. I think we're officially calling it Nature Bridges. Bridges stands for something that I could never remember. But the plan is we're going to take out a lot of this lawn area and plant a native garden. We're going to plant trees that were around in the ice ages, because for us, a lot of those plants are still around or are very similar to plants that are still around, and that will add to our new exhibit that'll open in May, which is a mammoth discovery, which is about a Columbian mammoth fossil that was found near the airport. And it will also, this space will then also have an environment lab, an education lab where we can teach classes and bring kids in, and I'm really hoping to get GigaPan in there to take lots of images throughout our watershed and let them explore and come to some conclusions about how we're doing with our water, and then over time see how things are changing and inspire some stewardship.
Any questions about their projects? In the meantime, Molly's going to set up, I think. I'm sorry? These photos were taken by Anna George, one of our BioSite facilitators. She's the one who introduced GigaPans to our organization, and so we're really excited.
Hello. First of all, thanks for inviting me to serve on this panel. This is a great opportunity. I think Marti did a great job of describing what I am. I think I'm too deep in it right now. I think I'll defend it in about a month. So I am kind of an academic mutt, very interdisciplinary, and I love it. And I think I can say that to this group, and it might be appreciated. Some places it's not. So those words encapsulate me. It's the best I can do. So I'm finishing my dissertation, and my scientific interests are primarily ecology and environmental science. I've been studying bugs in lakes in the Sierra Nevada. It's often, well, this is an area, first of all, that has not been sampled. Many areas in the U.S. have. So when I started out there in 2002, this is what I found. And I have to say, GigaPan was about 5 years late. I could have really used it at the beginning of my dissertation. So this is the image, this is my visualization of how I wanted to represent my research. I do have this obsession with combining photography and visual communication with my research, no matter where my research takes me. So I was trying to find ways to capture what I was seeing and convey it to other people. So this is my I wish I had a GigaPan collection. So I hope to go back at some point. And these were captured with the very complex 2-megapixel digital camera that I was able to purchase with my research money. And I had no idea how to take a panel, but somehow I did it and stumbled upon a stitcher. But they work. This is a more recent endeavor for myself into photography and doing more macroinvertebrate work, but taking organisms that are very common in your water systems, a leech indicating high abundance indicates not very good water quality. And this is quite abundant in our national park, in Rock Creek Park, Washington, D.C., which I've just relocated there. Of course, I take my dip net down to the stream, and this is what I find, tons of leeches. And if you don't know, Rock Creek Park is beautiful, but it's highly impaired. The waterways, tons of issues. So what a great opportunity to start communicating what is there so people will hopefully start to take action. So this is another, wish I had a GigaPan to get a picture of that. So I've been using GigaPan in my research to communicate the research of my lab. We do a lot of research in Lake Tahoe. This, I think, was my first GigaPan. It's okay, but could be better. So I'm using it to communicate the research that we are doing currently. And right now, the target audiences, I'm kind of doing this loosely. So I've gathered a lot of great ideas from this group. The primary question that I ask, and I'd like you to ask as well, is how can we conduct science and communicate science in ways that reshape people's perception, communities, the general public, that can lead us to a more sustainable decision making. And of course, we want that science to be part of that conversation. And the most concise way I can describe this is when we find new ways of seeing our world, we find new ways of being, and then that feeds back on itself. And so I'm very just obsessed really with science and photography and combining those two and pushing the two forward in ways that we can keep our planet livable, try to keep humans here. I think that's a good thing. So what I think is needed, from my perspective, is a stronger parallel between the science imagery that's out there, including any visual media source, with the current science that's being conducted. I think there's a huge lag. We need to move more from the species and habitat-centered imagery into some of this multi-scale, nano, et cetera, and get that out there just to the general public so that they're more visually literate. I think finding new ways to visualize data, which these are some things I think that we've heard a lot about over the last couple days that GigaPan is absolutely capitalizing on, and it's great. Just increasing appreciation for the art and science of visual communication, and I think this group probably appreciates that quite well. Generally within the sciences, I'm not sure that's the case, and so I've been doing some work to try to change that. Synergistic collaborations, I think, is definitely key. Again, GigaPan, kind of awesome at doing that, and this meeting is definitely a great example. But this is what I want to kind of send home to you today. Oops, sorry. Is that we need to take our science, create these great visuals, but then put it back into the societal context. When I became a scientist, I have a desire to explore and discover, and my curiosity is insatiable. But I don't want to lose that. And I do what I do because I want to make a change. I want to make social good. I want to use my work for social good. But I can't do that if I just go do my science to myself and smile in my lab when I find something new. I have to get that out there. So the context that I think that is really important that we can use GigaPan is to facilitate dialogue among people who would not normally be conversing. And I think it provides just enough distance that if you were sitting down at a table discussing your scientific project and how it's relevant, and to somebody else who has very different values, there's a lot of emotion there in that personal interaction. And I think GigaPan provides just enough distance that it can keep that, and just enough time lag to kind of allow you to think through it and ask questions, get an answer, think about it. So I think it's really valuable in that. So to pull stakeholders together on issues and get them communicating. And then I also think it's a good way to bring science back to the table, because decisions are being made, I'm being very general here, decisions are being made about how people go about their lives, and we know that it's not doing such great things to our planet. So it would make sense that we need to get science back into that decision-making process, and I think we've kind of lost that. It's not totally gone, kind of lost it. And I think at the community scale is a really good way to do this, and to keep the issues problem-focused. Water quality, for example, or a certain human health issue. And I do have to draw your attention, before I go on to one more example, back to the GigaPan magazine. If you haven't checked it out, I expand a tiny bit more on my thought on this, but there's a collection of great GigaPans that you could comment on, and encourage those around you that maybe aren't scientists to comment on as well, and try to start the dialogue on some of these. I try to choose GigaPans that were societally relevant current issues that we could chat about. So this is just an example of how I think GigaPan could be used in this environmental problem-solving context. I'd love to implement this at some point. We'll see. I grew up about 45 minutes west of here, right along the Ohio River. As you know, this community has gone through quite a shift, and it is quite resilient. I think there's a very strong sense of community here, but there's still a lot of issues going on. This is a power plant that has been a topic of conversation in my community since I can remember. It's recently been outfitted with scrubbers, but there's a lot of just talk in homes about what's going on with this. And I think that GigaPan could provide a great forum to formally sit down with intentional imagery and with an environmental or risk communicator, someone that's a professional mediator, and get all of these other groups to sit down around the table, facilitate a dialogue, and learn the different perspectives, and then I put environmental professionals. I don't know how to encapsulate the science that would be involved in that. I could probably put a few more chairs around the table, but bring science to the table, also recognizing that science is one perspective of this particular issue. So addressing the issues of air pollution or water quality, or fish habitat, fish community, is just one issue around that table. And I think it's really important that we remember that and listen to the other voices at the table, because in my work, the more I communicate about my research and the more feedback I get from people that have different views, it changes my science. It changes how I do it, and I think it makes it more relevant, and it makes me more excited because I see that people do care about this, but I think it's just opening that dialogue is really essential. So that's all I have. I'll take any questions.
I think we're running short on time, so I'm going to keep us going. We'll put the questions at the end, please. And so I think Dennis.
Sure.
Do you like to? Oh, that's fine. Yours is right here. Oh, here it is.
So good afternoon. Thanks for all being here. This is a very invigorating conference. I was a fellow a while ago, and I came back very excited about it 18 months ago, and I'm amazed at how excited I am again. What I want to do is a little bit different. I want to talk about sort of two things, basically. Some of our struggles and how we incorporate this as science, especially in implementing this as a citizen science project, and also how do we talk about this in terms of the extension component and sort of the resources you need to use it as an extension component. I'm a honeybee specialist, but I really am talking a lot more in the broader ideas of pollinator decline. And we have thousands of species of bees in this country, 400 species in Pennsylvania alone. And one of the real efforts that we're trying to do is encourage people to do pollinator gardens. And one of the real basic questions we don't have answers for is, well, what plants would you put in a pollinator garden? So in order to address this, we worked with the Xerces Society, which is a society dedicated to the preservation of invertebrates, and we came out with this manual, and what we had was we trained all these master gardeners to go out to pollinator gardens. They sat on a chair, watched the plant for 2 hours, marked off what they thought insects visited it, and we'd get this tally to figure out how many bugs are there. Well, the great thing about this is, well, maybe we can do this with GigaPans. And so we took pictures of these pollinator gardens. And indeed, you can find some of the bees. I mean, you'd never be able to identify that bee to species. But that big one there, if you knew anything, you'd know it was a bumblebee. And there's a whole bunch in this lavender. And then also the need to scientifically proof this or field proof this. And so in the bottom there, you'll see what we call a pan trap, which is this painted cup that attracts the bees, and there's soapy water there. So the bees go in there, kill it, and then we get someone like Rob Snyder in the back there, who's a good bee taxonomist, and we ID the bees. And so there's this need, I think, that when we're doing citizen science, to remember it's science, and we need to field proof it, and somehow sort of draw a correlation in what people are doing in the field and making it valid for what's there. And I think that that's something that I'm struggling with. Well, how do we do this? How do we make, it's great, citizen science is sexy, but how do we make sure that it's still science? And that's something maybe we can discuss broadly as a panel. So that was one of our struggles. And of course, then eventually what we'd like to do is photograph all these crops and look at flower pollinator dependence on crops, so you can compare organic crop production versus non-organic crop production, and then look for and just sort of figure out a new ratio, like a pollinator to flower ratio. And so that has struggles too, like how do you make sure everything's in focus? But I think those are technical issues which we can work with to correct. Oh, I'll skip that one. The next idea is using this as an extension tool, and this one I get really excited about. You've seen this image, no doubt, and I really do believe this image one day in the archives of the bee world will become famous as pivotal in changing how we do bee extension work. Because this picture, for the first time ever, you get a picture of a diseased frame and the disease in the cell. So usually there's healthy bees, which are these pearly white bees, and then you can see this other bee with sac brood virus there with this black snotty stuff. Well, if you go to any book, you only get that still picture. But here we have this dynamic picture where people can sort of scan from live bee to sick bee to dead bee, and that's fantastic. But when we took this picture, I certainly did not release this at to the bee community at all. But it got out there eventually, I think thanks to some of your promotional work. And suddenly you're inundated with 100,000 questions. And we just don't have the extension ability to, properly meta tag everything like that. And so that's another thing I think we have to build in, is just taking the picture and putting it out there is great, and that's an important first step. But what structures do you have there to answer that dialogue and communicate in that dialogue is one of our struggles. The last slide isn't here, and that's to do with the press. One of the things that was very clear when we started, the CCD story broke, was 60% of our time for 4 months was just dedicated to answering the press. And people were interested in movies and doing all of this stuff. So it's really exciting to get everyone excited, say, about global warming and our projects, but you have to deal with that press. And I think this hinted at one of the questions that was asked earlier. At what level and how do you screen that? I mean, if Nature comes and wants to do a documentary, you're going, yeah, or CNN or ABC Good Morning. But you have all these new up-and-coming documentarists, and you don't want to give them a chance. But some of them are agenda-driven. I'll never forget the day I walked into, Mike was doing an interview with this guy doing an autopsy, and she says, well, don't you believe bees are celestial beings? And then you're going, well, what type of media is this? And sure enough, the documentary is everything is pesticides, and everything I'm saying is it's pesticides, and I've never thought it was pesticides. So, how with all this media, with this attention we rightly want to draw into this, how do we edit it? How do we get the people looking at it to think critically about what they're seeing as well? So I guess those are my questions as part of the panel discussion. All right. Thanks.
I think that brings up some actually really interesting. Citizen science is very trendy, and lots of us are talking about doing it, but a number of projects that I've seen, these kinds of issues come up for scientists. Scientists, I don't think, want to become the Ask Jeeves Butler services to the public for answering all their questions all the time. So how to create these participatory structures that they can manage and effectively leverage their time is not necessarily a done deal. I think that there's an interesting report actually on the CASE website, the Center for the Advancement of Informal Science Education, and it calls it Public Participation in Scientific Research, and it's a long piece looking at a number of different citizen science projects, but it's really pushing or urging that we need to move from just citizens being involved in data collection to actually being involved in study design and analysis, and it's a lovely notion in some ways, but it's a kind of radical notion, I think, to imagine that scientists are going to be able to authentically and consequentially incorporate citizen science data into their projects. And so I think we might want to continue having some discussions about what does it mean to do good citizen science projects, and what should they look like. And Kevin's going to go next.
Great, thanks. Well, I can't figure out how to unmirror my displays, so I'm going to talk without the little notes on the bottom, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to try to put a little bit of a wrap on and leave some time for questions. And the thing I want to start with is the notion of pipeline. Any of you who are familiar with science policy, educational policy, are familiar with the term pipeline. We have been interested in this country investing heavily in developing a pipeline that's going to be sufficient to get kids from grade school or even earlier all the way through the various hoops they have to face at universities and get them out working as scientists and technologists. And this idea of pipeline, that, the whole point of the educational outreach that we're doing is to move people into our profession, is something that's a pretty unexamined assumption at this point. Many scientists are university professors, and of course, people would want to be like us. But the kinds of projects we're hearing about today aren't necessarily assuming that the outcome of this sort of interchange is that someone's going to get a PhD and go off and work in science. So I want to start just by unpacking the pipeline notion a little bit. Pipelines are about transport, right? We're finding these kids somewhere in grade school, and we're putting them into a system which is going to move them to this very distant place. They can't see it. We can see it because we've engineered a pipeline to get there. But the whole time they're in that pipeline, as they go through secondary school, as they go through college, it's the promise of this fantastic career as a scientist at the end of the pipeline that it's about. Pipelines are regulated, they're predictable, and they're pure. So if we have a system to pipe kids from elementary school to careers in science, we have to make sure we have enough product moving through that pipeline to feed the careers on the other side. And we have to regulate the system, right? We have to figure out who's going to make it to the next level and who needs to be culled from the pipeline, dumped on the side of the road, so that when we get to the end, we've only got people who are qualified to be the next generation of scientists and engineers. And finally, pipelines, perhaps their worst feature is they're made of pipes, right? So the stuff that you're pumping in the educational system from elementary school out through the back of graduate school, you don't want that to interact too much with any of the landscape the pipeline is moving through. You don't want to be distracted from the mission of creating a mini-me scientist by something like what they care about, what they're concerned about, what science and society might be arguing about. So this picture is a little bit brutal, I think, but it's not an inaccurate reflection of some of the policy discussions that I'm involved in around science education. It's difficult to get a group of scientists focusing on education to realize people might choose not to be scientists, and that might be okay. It's not a failure of the system if we have artists or, engineers are scientists, right? We know they're not, but scientists are the success stories, engineers, technologists, mathematicians, artists, historians, English majors, people who build things with their hands. All of these are choices people make which might be connected and enriched and with science, But when we think about outreach as just the pipeline and we're only concerned with the product that pumps out the distal end, we overlook the fact that there are all of these opportunities to think about science-citizen connections. So there was a report released by the National Academy of Sciences, Learning Science in Informal Environments last year, and they begin to challenge the pipeline notion. They begin to put forward an idea that rather than pipelines, let's start thinking about an ecology where science is part of a conversation with people, even if they're not in school, if they're older adults perhaps living in Kansas, hooked up on the Facebook, if they're kids who aren't interested in science, if there are people who need to make decisions that would affect things like climate change. And so if it's not a pipeline, when we think about scientific outreach, maybe we're thinking more like one of these crazy water cycle diagrams that I'm sure that you've seen before, where the thing that flows through the system maybe isn't people going from school to career, but maybe it's knowledge, maybe it's ideas, maybe it's data. And there are many exchange mechanisms, and there are lots of ways that it enriches the environment. You talk about the lawns in San Jose. I'm thinking about in LA, there's a wonderful pipeline that takes water from the mountains and deposits it in the desert that's LA, and you get these great looking lawns in Beverly Hills, and in between it, you've still got the desert. That water hasn't done anything as the pipeline passes through it. So rather than words like transport, gatekeeping, commodity, people are trying to get scientific outreach to connect more with words like infusion, participation, wide participation, and diversity, that there are many kinds of science and ideas about science that should be part of our outreach. So we, just to prove I'm a scientist, because I'm a learning scientist, we collected data and we interviewed a bunch of robotics professors about how they do outreach. And we identified 3 philosophies. Telling, which is what National Geographic has done so well all of these years, opening a window to science, showing off your research and ideas, what's cool, helping people understand if they stick in the pipeline, that's the cool thing that's at the far end of it. Coaching, which is getting people involved in experiences which will help them become more pipeline ready. Things like building robots in competitions or doing science fair stuff, where you are doing meaningful activity with people, but the whole point is to help them through the pipeline. And the third thing that we discovered, and this is a relatively new thing, robotics is a great place to see it happen, is this idea of participation and collaboration, where what it means to do outreach is not to begin the conversation by saying, I'm the scientist, I know the issue, I know the answer, and now I'm going to make it palatable to you. Instead, you begin the conversation, it sounds like the way Dennis does with the beekeepers, by saying, what are your problems, what are your interests, what are your passions, where do we have some overlap? And that's kind of a brave thing for science to do because it means we don't control the agenda. What if people aren't interested in talking about what it is that I do as a scientist? That's pretty threatening to me, but on the other hand, maybe if I listen to people, we'll start moving science in a different direction. And that's been a philosophy of the Create Lab, which is the developer of the GigaPan for a while. In robotics, what if people had a say in what the next generation of robotic technologies, what if someone other than the Defense Department got to ask us to do something as a field? It's mind-blowing. So the GigaPan in particular, I think, is a potentially transformational tool. There are others like it. It's not unique, but the affordances of the GigaPan, I think, collect around 3 points. One, it's a common tool. It's dead simple to use. The same GigaPan that kids in San Jose will be using is the same GigaPan that the scientists in the room are using to collect their data. And the data becomes shared. The exact same data can be used for science and for engagement, which hasn't always been the case. I mean, NASA and NOAA sure do like to get their data from their near-Earth observatories and such integrated into educational programs. They're not that interested in collecting data that we take of stars. We don't have the technology, we don't have the tool. But with GigaPan, citizen science becomes enabled in ways that I think might address the quality problem. You might be able to, with the GigaPan, think about an image that a scientist could use, even if they weren't there to collect it. And finally, gigapan.org and other things like it enables shared interpretation and scaffolded and connected communication. And I think that's really the key. Disembodied data is vaguely interesting, but if I don't have a way to connect it to my interest and understand what the scientist sees, what other people like I see in it, it's very limited as a learning tool for me. So I think that's really the next frontier, is thinking about how to design around these images participatory structures which really allow us to communicate something, point-to-point communication that's interesting and valuable between the scientist and the citizen. So what's the big vision behind all of this? I'll have to pop out to my notes. I took notes on what people said in these presentations, and here's what we heard. We heard things like niche communities, older adults getting networked, active exploration, underserved, hard-to-reach communities. I make them smaller, you can't see them, I can't see them, I'll make them bigger. We'll just look at the left half. Science mutt, wished I had a GigaPan. Issue-oriented science, citizen science, flooded with thousands of questions. Who knew the world wanted to talk about my bee issues? All of that doesn't sound much like a pipeline to me. All of that sounds like an opportunistic, emerging kind of stance that science has, where we're always looking for opportunities to converse with a passionate and interested public, and they're out there. It's just that when all we show them is the pipeline and the opportunity to become just like me, that only appeals to people who are probably going to make it anyway. And we have to do a whole lot better as scientists about thinking about how our work is valuable to society and how we can push a conversation forward that enriches us as well as the world. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Marti.
Right, thank you. We have about 5 minutes to follow up with questions. There's a number of different perspectives that have been brought up here, and I think I'd like to open it up to you all as the audience to sort of pursue this conversation in the direction you'd like to take it. Is there any questions about any of the talks?
I was wondering, from all these different types of outreach and communication, from mainstream media to direct educational outreach with kids, how do you try to evaluate the effectiveness of these efforts?
Kevin, do you want to take that evaluation as a sort of a strong suit?
Well, I can start, but I'd be really interested to hear what some of the other people up here think. That's a really hard question. It has to do with the pipeline. So what is it that you were trying to do in that program? How do we develop an instrument, a set of measurements, a set of observational tools that allow you to prove that that happened? That's an open scientific question right now in informal learning research. So you can read that book that I showed, Learning Science in Informal Environments, and that'll get you started on what some people are doing. But what I would recommend is that you find somebody interested in learning and education, you develop a collaboration with them. This is a very hot area. This is an area that attracts a ton of funding right now. So they're out there, partners who want to work with you on that issue. We're in exploration mode.
I think some of the things, too, that if you look at in the public understanding of science model, it was knowledge changed, scientific skills, inquiry skills. Those were often kind of the impacts you were looking for. A kid would watch a television program, they'd come out and they'd take a test and they'd know more or less, so a pre-post kind of thing. I think as you start to read the literature and then listen to the discussions, things like motivation, interest, identity building, engaging in science is a cultural practice. That's not necessarily something you even do at home. And so I think starting to look for those kind of outcomes and impacts is an interesting and innovative area to look in, and it's worth considering when you're writing those outreach and education impact. Yeah. Hello.
Sorry. So I think one of the things that's interesting, especially about the television, is one of the things that happened early on is Haagen-Dazs gave money to the bee research thing, and so they would press some of the press things. And any time there came a press release that had Haagen-Dazs in it, apparently there's this whole media web that sort of tells you exactly the dollar value by second on airtime. And so that was an amazing thing to me, that there's this whole corporate structure that sort of gives exactly, you had 4.5 million people watch this, it was 30 seconds long, this had a value of $3.4 million. And I wonder if there's a way that we can sort of start using that in some of what we do, because corporate America's figured it out, so maybe we need to have them here too at some point.
Just to follow up with the example I gave at the end, some of the work that I've started to do is assessing risk perception, so surveying pre and post experience as to the knowledge and perceived risk of BPA or methylmercury, or what in your daily life are you scared of? What are you most nervous about? And then in this example, it would be at a community level pre-GigaPan experience and post-GigaPan experience to see if that risk perception has changed, and that, of course, tied to behavior and choices. So.
Do we have any more questions? We have probably time for one or two more questions. Any comments?
I could add a little something on the evaluation idea. The Children's Museum in San Jose has had a long-standing 10 or 15-year partnership with a developmental psychologist at UC Santa Cruz. And she is interested in how parents communicate science with their children. And so right now, for example, we're opening a new exhibit in May, so we've had prototyping labs with all of our exhibits that will be in this new exhibition out in the floor so parents and children can come experience it, and we can watch and see how they interact with it, how it breaks, when it breaks, and what gets taken and what gets lost. But she also goes in there with her students every weekend, and they watch and they observe, and then they get to use that experience in their research, and we get the data to add to or subtract from our exhibits as we feel necessary based on that data, which is an informal, it's a formal evaluation, but we don't have the time or the manpower necessarily to do it as an institution, but Maureen can, and they're very, very good at it, and it's been a very valuable collaboration.
There was one other thing I was going to mention, vaguely relative to all of this, is I showed a picture this morning of an astronomer up on Mount Wilson with the city down below, and then I showed a picture right after that of a guy standing out front of his house in that dark sky housing development, and the Milky Way was up above. So the question was, that guy was an amateur astronomer. He's Canadian, but he has this house down there. Amateur astronomer, and I was there in about July or something like this, and at that time he had discovered 5 supernovae that year, named after him. He's a participating astronomer. He's an amateur astronomer, And so one of the questions I think that comes up is, who gets to do science? And what are we going to call science? Is science what scientists, ordained scientists, do? Or how are we going to regulate or value or use all these people who are out there who have great skills, great enthusiasm, great things to contribute, and yet, aren't, sort of in the ordained academic community?
So just a couple closing things. I just wanted to make people aware, unless they're not, there's a NSF, anyone who has an NSF-funded grant can go after additional funding through this CRPA mechanism, the Communicating Research to Public Audiences. I think it was for grants up to $150,000. There's talk now about raising that to $250,000 and trying to really take seriously scientists trying to communicate their research to public audiences. And so I would encourage you to think about that if you have an NSF grant, and think about this whole set of professionals that do informal science education, from the after-school programs to the museums to the citizen science. There's a large body of people who are actually quite expert in thinking about how to communicate and interface between science and publics. And just in that vein, too, Ginger Pinholster from the AAAS was supposed to be on our panel. She couldn't make it. But the NSF and AAAS has a whole website devoted to public engagement in science. And I would encourage you, again, if you're looking for ideas or funding and those kinds of things, to check out some of those sections on the website. Any other? Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a fantastic panel. I wish we had answers to all the questions that they've asked. These are exceedingly important questions for the future of our society. I will let you know what's happening next. We have a coffee break now. In 10 minutes, we're going to start our final panel, and it's an exciting one. It's a time-lapse GigaPan panel. So at 3:30, we'll begin time-lapse GigaPan right here. So please take a moment and to relax and stretch and have some coffee and tea.